Our productivity becomes toxic when we become singularly focused on outcomes. So you become disconnected from yourself. You have no boundaries. You don't know what your emotions are. You exist to please other people because you are in service of producing for acceptance and belonging.
Israa Nasir is a psychotherapist, writer, and founder of Well Guide, a digital community for mental health awareness. And today she's here to share her powerful insights about the concept and application of productivity in our modern world. We're living at a time where exhaustion is like, it really is a status symbol in a way. You know, I'm doing the most, It's a cultural term, but we oftentimes are sacrificing our well-being in order to do more. What is going on? What's going on with this paradigm? Why are so many of us living our lives in this way?
I really believe that so our emotions are a very powerful driver of our behavior. And I think as society has transformed and the lines between work and home, personal life and friendships, they're all kind of blurring. What's happened is, in order to cope with these uncomfortable feelings, we're actually tapping into productivity habits and achievement. And we're utilizing that as a way to self-soothe. And it gives you a very quick return, right? Like if you're feeling bad about yourself, you do something, you achieve something, you immediately feel good. And you're like, oh, okay, I can keep doing this. And the more you do it, the more you can tell people. And the more you tell people, the more you get external validation. And that just the cycle keeps growing deeper and deeper. And I think that it's very rewarded, right? Like you get a lot of kudos for it. Even like when I was just knee deep in all of this stuff personally, one of the things people would often say to me is, oh my gosh, like, how do you do so much? Like, I would be such a mess if I was doing so many things, right? And I took that as, damn, I'm so competent. Here I am doing all the things, but my wellness was absolute trash. I was living off of Kind bars and, coffee. It was not a good life.
The C and the K.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess so.
Kind and coffee.
Yeah, exactly. It's a fast lifestyle, but it's not a good one.
Yeah. That was not very kind.
No.
To yourself.
It was very unkind.
But, many of us fall into those patterns, in seeking out. And I love this about your book. One of the lines that you shared was essentially, we have all this potential in us. And instead of being grateful or rewarded or having introspection about this potential, we measure ourselves by our potential to create and to do more, instead of just our value as a human being and the potential that we have in us as a human being. And so it's kind of a race to the bottom, essentially today, and all of this competition. And I've been thinking about this a lot lately. We really evolved in cooperation, and there's so much less of that. And even just cooperating in a family context, we're all so isolated and it's just leading to these behaviors. And as you shared, just to even kick things off, we're band-aiding it by being more productive. We don't address the feelings. Like, I feel alone. I feel like, I just don't feel good. Yeah. And we try to self-soothe.
Yeah, I think you're talking about the convergence of so many factors on this, right? And I think that it's definitely impacting our relationships. That's why when I was doing the research for this book, I really wanted to go beyond the workplace. Because when we think about productivity and hyper-optimization and things like that, we usually think of work. But what's happening is we're bringing this into our relationships. And so we're feeling lonelier, we're feeling disconnected, we are feeling underfulfilled. And all of that is creating this like friction. I think just overall, the temperature, or like the environmental temperature of people is just so just like there's so much friction right underneath the surface. And you see it now with people having public meltdowns everywhere on airlines and the mall, like
Walmart, definitely.
Road rage, right? And I think it's because we're just not addressing our emotions in a healthy way. And I think that was the biggest gap that I saw when I was starting to do research on this, because of my own experiences, was that I think people talk a lot about surface level behaviors, creating systems, organizing yourself, time management. But those are only helpful when you are feeling good, right? When you're not feeling good, your emotions will take over and you will start behaving in a very survival mindset. And that is very urgent. It's fight or flight. It's stressed out. It's frankly toxic. Yeah.
This is such a good segue
Oh, yeah.
because I feel like there's this underlying thing for many of us. If I can just produce, I'll feel better. Right. So let's talk about the difference between productivity and toxic productivity.
Yeah. So I think that our productivity becomes toxic when we become singularly focused on outcomes. So we are in pursuit for the sake of pursuit. We're like, I have to get this, but it's a very unintentional pursuit. You don't know why you're pursuing the thing you're pursuing, whether it's a relationship, whether it's a job, a salary. So I live in New York City and I meet so many people per week who say arbitrary things to me. Like, I want to hit my first million before 40. I want to make it to VP before 32, right? And these are arbitrary deadlines that were self-imposed. You don't know why you're pursuing it. You just want that check mark, right? So that's one thing. The other thing is, in that pursuit, that the pursuit becomes primary. So your wellness, your relationships, your health, joy, beauty, all of that becomes irrelevant. So you will forego a friend's birthday to work a little bit more. You will skip out on, a dinner so that you can do something that is more achievement oriented. People have started pruning their social circles to only be around like successful people, right? Because of that thing that people say that you're the average of the 5 people you're around. So it's making our relationships very transactional. And the final thing I'll say, productivity becomes harmful when our value, our sense of self, our self-image becomes completely contingent on the outcome. So you only feel good about yourself if you achieve the outcome. So there's a very binary thinking about if you're good enough or not. And when that happens, you start believing that I'm only valuable to this person, to society, to my family, if I'm producing this outcome. And outside of that, I have no value. So you become disconnected from yourself. You have no boundaries. You don't know what your emotions are. You exist to please other people because you are in service of producing for acceptance and belonging. And that's a very long answer. But I think, this shows up in the small ways every day.
In your book, you actually talk about the fact that being a therapist, you're always looking at the why behind the what. Right. So the person wanting to be VP by 32 or hitting their first million by 40, that's a what. But why do you want that? Like, where did you get that idea from? Not that it's a bad idea. That's the thing, too. Right. And having goals and aspiration is a big part of being human. But if we don't have some introspection on why we want the thing, right, the why behind the what, we can end up siphoning so much of our life energy after something that wasn't even giving us the fulfillment we wanted in the first place, because that's what we're really after. And you shared your own story about this. If you could share a little bit, because you were productivity boss.
Yes.
But then you ran into some issues.
I did. I was raised to be a very successful student, and overachieving, high achieving, that's just like the family culture. And so that embedded in me this drive to whatever I touch has to be gold. Like, I could never do something in a mediocre way. And if it was mediocre, it felt really bad, right? So I had this mindset that I have to do a lot. It's not just enough to only get an undergrad. It's not just enough to only get a master's. Like, you also have to do other things and you're constantly moving. And so by the time I hit my early 30s, I had achieved a lot of the things that I was working towards in my 20s, right? So I was expecting it to feel good. I was expecting that, this is what the other side will feel like, right? I checked all the things. I'm living in New York. But that feeling didn't come. Like I didn't feel good. And I just felt emptier, if that makes any sense. I felt disengaged from my life. I felt very disconnected from the people around me. At one point, I even wondered if I was getting depressed. Maybe I was like high functioning depressed. But it wasn't that. And I think that's what indicated to me that there's something off balance. Something is happening.
Yeah.
If it's not depression, then why am I feeling this way? Right? Why don't things feel good? And I really had to take a step back and reflect on where I was putting my energy, where I was putting my time. How was I feeling before and after doing the things? And I did this like 3-4 week audit on myself. And I think that's where my like therapist hat really kick in. I was like, why am I doing this? And this is before I started my own therapy. So I'm just doing it on my own. I'm just using all the skills I know that I would use on a client. Obviously biased because I'm doing it on myself. But it did indicate like a pattern to me that I was driven by a lot of fear of missing out on opportunities, fear of like things will slip through my hands and I won't get it. And I'm not maximizing. I was very much on like maximizing opportunities, time, all of that stuff. And I just realized that there were some things I had to change in order to feel good. But that was like the beginning point of my journey. Like it didn't end there. Like that started this exploration into what does being busy actually give me? What does it mean for me? I was exchanging it for a feeling. And the feeling was being valued and being perceived as competent. That was a big part of my self-identity is other people seeing me as competent. And I mean, and that just comes from like my family role. Like I'm the middle child, I'm the eldest daughter, I'm a child of immigrants, I'm a Libra, like whatever it is, right? But that perception of competence is really important for me. That I'm very self-sufficient. I got this. I can figure this out.
Yeah.
But that was like making me miserable. So I had to stop.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of people can identify with some of those quote quirks, I guess, you know, some of those ways of being. And I encourage everybody to really think about like, why do we do some of the things we do? We live so much of our life, especially today, on autopilot. And we don't give ourselves time to even think or to decompress or to think about our thinking, you know, and we just fall into these patterns. And oftentimes today, more than ever, we have an epidemic of unhappiness. And like, what is this all about if it's not for your well-being and for your happiness? And now I want to ask you about this because, you know, it sounds similar to how many of us grow up, which is like, we're doing these things to better our family. We aspire to push our families forward and just to take care of our loved ones, right? And I know a lot of parents, it's self-sacrifice, right? And doing whatever we have to do to put food on the table, roof over the heads, and clothes on the back, right? I heard these things from my mother a lot. And of course, I have that drive. I think it's an innate human thing to want to take care of our family. And today, more than ever, we have so many options. Now, with that being said, this gets into conversation that it's a complicated P word that is getting kicked around a lot without context often. And you're just like, what P word is this?
Yeah. Productivity.
Privilege. It's privilege.
Yes.
And having the privilege to think about my thinking, to think about my why behind my what, right? I'm busy. I'm trying to just get this stuff done because I have to survive, right? There is that. But I want to say this, our ancestors, you know, even just a few generations ago, that work life, and again, working hard for their families, they had time to think still, right? There was time to think. We weren't constantly plugged into something, even in our downtime. I'm seeing, again, I just walk down the street, people are just, if they're waiting on the taco truck or if they're waiting on they're on their phone, right? Everybody immediately is jacked into the matrix. As soon as you get out the matrix, if you get out of it, you're doing your stuff and then you get right back to it. And we don't have time to decompress. And so how do we think about this in terms of, again, I want to produce so I could take care of my livelihood and my family, but not venture into a place where this is literally killing me.
That is a really important point. And I think it is definitely a privilege to think about, how you live your life, because you have some choices to make. And that, I would say, that's like the foundational difference between the way my parents worked and the way I work, right? Like, they were immigrants and internally displaced refugees in a conflict. To them, work was survival. Like, if you were not hustling, you could literally lose everything, right? And so, but that's the model that I grew up in. Yeah. But I get the privilege to step out of it and say, let me just think about why I'm doing the things I'm doing. And I think the way to balance that is to think about your intention. I think our intention really guides whether our productivity is healthy or harmful. Why are you chasing this thing? What are you hoping to get out of it? What is the intention behind the actions that you take? And a lot of times, even when we are in survival mode, we are still engaging in a lot of extraneous things that might not actually be beneficial to your survival, right? So just stopping to think about, is this truly necessary? And is it going to improve my life in some way? I think is a really good way to start thinking about that. And the other thing I'll say is, there's sometimes life circumstances that you cannot kind of get out of, right? Like, maybe you have to work multiple jobs. Maybe that's just what your situation is. To those people, I always say, it's okay to kind of sprint sometimes you need to sprint in an unhealthy or toxic productive way, because it needs to get you on the other side. Right. But once you get to the other side, be mindful about stepping out of this mindset. So if you have seasons of your life or circumstances that are requiring you to rise up and really hustle because you need to, absolutely do that, because that's your survival. But when you get to the other side, have a clear definition of what enough is so that you can step out of it. And that way you can tap into this when needed as like a coping skill instead of it being your whole life. Right. And so I can do that. Like, now I can say that because I was in this, like, obviously, like, hustle mentality for many years. But currently right now, I'm in a season of like hyper productivity because my book is coming out in 4 weeks, but I had a 10-week countdown and I've just been on the grind. But what gives me hope is I know that I can tap out of it when the book is out. Right? Like, I have a plan, and that way I have balance in my life. And I think that's what I want people to have. I'm not saying become anti-productive. I'm not saying forget your ambitions. I'm just saying you should have some balance.
Yeah. This is fire. All right. So you said something so profound right here that we overlook. You said seasons. All right. This is a part. We talk a lot about like circadian medicine and like our clock genes. And this is a part of reality here on planet Earth. There are seasons on this planet, and we evolve experiencing seasons. And the same thing goes for how we're working and how we're producing. There's supposed to be times of transition, but in our culture today, we basically have one button. And you talk about that in the book as well. It's seen as very binary. Like, you're either productive or you're not productive.
Yeah.
And so, and of course, this is one of my questions I was going to bring up was like, you're out here doing, the book tour and you're doing all this stuff. And I would imagine you're being extremely productive right now. And isn't this counter the message? But it's honoring, this is facts. It's a season. You're in a season right now, and it's intentional. And also what's on the other side of that is probably intentional time to decompress.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Truthfully, I'm not doing a book tour right after. I'm doing a book tour in January, like 2 months later, because I want that holiday time with my family. I want to go see my parents and my in-laws and I want to chill for a little bit. And that keeps me going. Like, I slept 4 hours yesterday. I had 5 podcasts today, right? This is a very hyper-productive season for me, but I know that in 4 weeks, this is going to be done and I will intentionally rest. So, yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing, the insider experience, and that's amazing because all of us experience opportunities also of those sprints. And this is kind of how I think of things as well. And, there are certain things that are operating as a marathon kind of in the background, whether again, it's family, taking care of things and whatnot, but having those sprints of things that you're hyper focused on and hyper productive, really. And then times again where you are able, and this is tough. This is tough for me personally. It has been to give myself permission. And I want to talk about this, what goes on in our psychology of somebody who is a creator, somebody who is driven to serve and to, do good in the world, right? And so I'm very passionate about helping families, helping people's health. And so that really does drive me, but that can drive me right into poor health, right? Sacrificing myself. And I've been through seasons of that. And so developing a mindset like mine, it comes at a cost of, in those downtimes, thinking about what I could be doing, how productive, what I'm sacrificing, right? And so you talk about that in the book as well. Like when you're on vacation, for example, and you're thinking about work or whatever the case might be, how common is that?
It's extremely common. And I think work is the most common thing people think about at work, on vacation, especially now, like here in North America, people will leave on vacation and say stuff like, if you need me, you can Slack me. I have my notifications on. Right? Whereas you go to Europe and you can't contact anybody for the entire month of August. You're like sending them emails and they have this like out of office that says, I'm coming back in September. So it's a cultural difference here in North America. But I do want to say one thing about this seasonality of kind of like being flexible and adaptive to your life, right? If life is coming at you with something that requires you to kind of put a little bit more of yourself in, if you have previously been more intentional about your energy and time resources, you will be able to deliver when it's required. If you're always giving your 110%, and that's your baseline, when something extraneous comes at you and you have to now go above and beyond, you actually don't have anything to give. So you won't be able to rise to the occasion. And so that's how I think about it. Earlier this year, I was very intentional about not taking on more work. I stopped doing my consulting. I stopped doing therapy as a therapist, and because I knew that this was coming. So I was able to prioritize. Yeah. And our current urgency culture is telling us not to prioritize.
Yeah.
It's saying everything is equally important. Every single email is equally important. Every notification needs to be addressed, right? And so you're constantly giving 100%. And that's why the productivity becomes harmful. Yeah. So to me, the seasonal sprint mindset makes my productivity longer. Like it's more sustainable. I get to be productive forever, right? And that's a good thing for me because I can tap in and out of it instead of being super productive and then just crashing, which is what happened earlier.
My next question is about where our psyche comes from. All right. And my decisions that I'm making, for example, coming out of the gate, when I wrote my first book, I was working as a nutritionist and I had people coming in all day, but I decided I'm going to go in early, first couple of hours, and try to get done like half a chapter a day, we'll just say, like really intensely focus, but then work with people the rest of the day and then come home and be super dad, super husband, and all the things. All right. So it was a season. And after getting that done, I definitely, again, just life structured in a certain way, maybe it was unconscious, where I pulled back and kind of got ready for when the book comes out, right? So and also I started to transition out of doing clinical work, right? And once the book came out, I just focused on that. And so, but once I got to my next book, I literally shut everything in my life down except writing and researching and doing the Model Health Show once a week. I turned down incredible, again, it's the FOMO,
yes,
right?
Yeah.
Some incredible opportunities to speak at really cool events and places and stuff like that, and a bunch of other stuff, and just focus on this because I had experience knowing what this is going to do to me if I try to do too many things at one time. And over time, and the crazy thing is, even if your book is really about health, it's about mental health and well-being overall, but it can be unhealthy to write a health book if you're not careful about it. And this just speaks to your experience, like your wisdom, the way that you're doing things. Like the fact that you're taking off for the holiday season I love that so much.
Yeah.
It's
Thank
so
you.
awesome. And also you're knowing that this is going to be there. This issue is not going anywhere, but this is my opportunity to invest in me. And so I want to ask you about our come from when we're making these choices, because I have sacrificed myself and my well-being in order to serve others on more than one occasion. My wife would tell you I do it all the time, but it energizes me in a way too. And so, but other people have different things for their come from, for their toxic productivity. And so I want to talk about our emotional foundation.
Yeah.
Right.
I love talking about this stuff because this is like the most therapy, clinical foundation. And why we do the things we do is based on how we learn to relate with others when we're very young. And that can be from your primary caretakers, so your family, your siblings, neighborhood, peers, friends, teachers, right? But it is the way we view the world and the way we view ourselves in relation to other people is really built in the formative years. And it can change as we grow older. Like, our families are not our destiny, but it only changes if we are intentional about changing it, right?
Yeah.
So we learn in our families how to get accepted. We learn in our families what belonging looks like, right? How will people be happy with me? How do I get what I need from people if I need them to take care of me? And it creates these emotional foundations of perfectionism, of a fear of expressing your needs, right? Which is commonly known as people pleasing. How do I get people to love me if I'm very good, right? If I don't ruffle any feathers, if I bring home the awards, then my parents will love me. And maybe some parents do this explicitly, and that's a different conversation. But I think most parents are pretty well-meaning, right? Like they want to encourage their kids. They want them to do well. They put them in all these like different things so that their skill set is expanded. So it's not like a malicious thing. Like my parents were not malicious when they were like, yeah, be an overachiever. And they didn't say it like that, but they were not like driving me out of ill intent. But we just learn, it maps to the receiver, the child, in a different way. So you as a parent are saying, I'm so proud of you, right, to your kid. But me as a kid, I'm hearing, I have to make my parents proud for them to stay happy. And then that extends to other relationships. That extends to your boss. And it shows up in work. And so that is where we build this foundation. And a lot of times when we don't do well, there's a lot of shame. Shame is a very disciplinarian tool that is used by a lot of families and school, right? So shame becomes a really powerful driver. If I feel shame, I'm going to do everything to not feel it. And that means I'm just going to get busy. I'm going to get so busy that I don't feel that shame anymore. If I have guilt, I'm going to try to alleviate it by action. I'm going to start moving, doing things, changing things in my life so I don't feel guilty. If I'm afraid that you're going to reject me, I'm going to be perfect. So you don't do that. And so these emotional drivers are just lurking so deep in the back that we don't even know that that's what's operating. Yeah.
And if we don't have the tools, and in this culture, we oftentimes don't, and this is why resources like this are so important. I want to ask you about, because some of this is creating our beliefs about ourselves, obviously, and our sense of, and these two words can be, I think, a little bit, people have them be interchangeable, but they're not, self-worth and self-esteem.
Yeah.
Can we talk about the difference between the two?
Yeah. So they are used interchangeably, but they're very different things. So self-esteem is what we see as our value in the face of our achievements. So self-esteem is externally validated, and there is a level of external validation that is healthy, right? You get something, somebody gives you applause, you feel good. That's a healthy model of being. Self-worth, though, is your inherent value as a human being outside of what you can achieve or produce or bring to the table. So this is like your basic human dignity, your value as a person. It has nothing to do with achievements. And what happens is we kind of merge the two.
Yeah.
And our self-worth, what I feel that I'm valued at as a human being, becomes connected to my external achievements. And external achievements are sometimes out of our control. They are kind of like varying throughout life, right? So it goes up and down. And when your value as a person becomes connected to that, then your value in your eyes will go up and down, right? So I work with a lot of high achieving people as a therapist, and many of them, their sense of identity is just fused with their jobs, with their titles, with having a role. And when there's layoffs, somebody gets fired, like, they lose their job, devastates them. It completely shatters their sense of self because they think that they're only valued if they're working. And that's the harm in putting your value in an external achievement. But there are different things.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. I think one of the kind of popular ways that we see something like that is athletes.
Yes.
Happens a lot.
Yeah.
And again, it's kind of like the identity being tied to this particular thing, but it's inevitably going to change. And we see the fallout with a lot of athletes and, really lacking in, identity and finding another way to kind of transform or transition into something else. This actually happened for me in a way because coming from an environment where that's really the way out is through athletics. And, when my body started to break down when I was just a teenager, it just really, I struggled a lot, and I can look back at those times, like seeing myself getting into more fights and having more challenges and being able to, understand today we have more options. There are so many different things that we can attach ourselves to, but any one thing, if that becomes our identity, we're going to suffer. And what I was lacking was a sense of self-worth, really, just, a sense of worthiness. And I carried that with me into adulthood. And I still have some inklings of that for sure. And because of the message in my environment was, if you're going to be successful, if you're going to be safe, you have to suffer. You have to suffer in order to accomplish anything, because I saw so much suffering. And the thing that I learned just in the past year, and I want to ask you about this, for me, what was holding me back from being able to metabolize some of this stress was talking about it, right? It's only been about a year where I actually, because I'm carrying all this stuff, subconsciously having this belief that I have to suffer through this. If I'm going to make the world a better place, if I'm going to, fill in the blank, suffering is required. And having a respected voice of reason to share with me to work on my sense of worthiness, to really focus on that, because my self-esteem is sky high, but the self-worth can be an issue even for some of the strongest among us. Absolutely.
And this idea that good things have to be painful is a very pervasive myth in our culture, right? I mentioned this in the book too, but I think a lot of us are very mean to ourselves to motivate ourselves because we think that's the only way to motivate yourself is to just kind of yell at yourself or be disparaging and really use that as fuel to motivate yourself. A lot of us shame ourselves to motivate ourselves. And there's this idea that if I'm not suffering, if I'm not in pain, if this is not hard, and hard doesn't mean challenging, hard means painful, right? Then it's not worth it. Then I'm not doing the right thing. And in fact, I used to think that too. I used to be very extremely overwhelmed and frazzled and stressed out all the time. But I honestly just believe that that's what you do if you're ambitious. If you're not stressed out, then you're not ambitious. How could you be chill if you're an ambitious person, right? And so I think that's the thing is we need to kind of reimagine the ways that we can be motivational to ourselves, that we can be productive, we can be ambitious in all of these different ways. And I think, unfortunately, there is, not to make this purely like a gender binary, because I think everybody can experience this. But the way different genders are socialized definitely impacts the way we internalize stress. So men, unfortunately, in the patriarchal paradigm, are not allowed to talk about their feelings, right? Nobody talks about how damaging the patriarchy is for men. It doesn't allow you to speak about what you're feeling. And so you carry it with you, and you get heart disease, and you get like high cholesterol, or you become aggressive, right? Because there is no outlet. You are robbed of your humanity because someone is saying to you, you can't talk about your feelings. And that, most men I work with, their identity is like this to their work. And it's the only way they can get their like competition and aggression out, because they can't talk about their feelings. Yeah.
You're reading me right now.
Yeah.
That was a specific thing, the example that I was going to share, in this past year in sharing how I feel. That's something I hadn't historically really done. Here and there, maybe I might say something to my wife, but also because my perspective was all of the things that I'm carrying, I got this. I have this, and I'm strong, and I have the capability, and I love it. Also, I had that story as well. And it's not that it's not true, but I didn't ever share if I was exceedingly stressed. I didn't. Yeah.
Sorry, I was going to say, you probably didn't even have the language for it, right? If you ask most people to describe emotions, they'll say excited, angry, happy, sad. That's it. So the vocabulary is so limited because you've never actually accessed that part of your brain. You were just not allowed, you don't know how to do it, right? And so how can you talk about it? Yeah. You can talk about how it feels in your body, right? So a lot of people will say, like, I just can't sleep, or I've been eating more, or my shoulder hurts, right? We can talk, but that's just stress manifesting itself.
Yep. Yeah. I hope everybody's listening. There's a lot of people. And again, thank you for sharing that, because it does lean towards men, especially again, because you're not voicing how you feel, but you work yourself into the ground for your family, for the mission, whatever the case might be. And the only time that people will be okay with you not, showing up for the thing that you're supposed to show up for is if you're in the hospital or if you're completely wiped out, like taken off the board. And because then that gives you a reason. Yeah. Now I have a real reason. It's because I literally can't move or can't function. And we've got to stop putting ourselves in position to where that's the end story, because our families and our communities don't just want us to show up. They want the best of us. And the best of us requires us to put some energy into ourselves and to have more well-being.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a journey. It's a journey for people, though. Earlier, you mentioned that, there was these issues with self-worth over time, and you might have some inklings of it right now as well. And I'll say that the feeling of having like solid self-worth is not a destination anyone ever arrives at and stays. So that's a very common like self-judgment that I hear people say is, oh, look, I should be healed. I've done all the work, or I was healed before, now I'm not, so all that work is gone. But it's really like a constant journey, because we are constantly changing. So our self-worth evolves as we change. Our self-esteem evolves as we change, right? And it's important to see yourself as a constant work in progress. Healing is not a destination. It's actually the process through which you achieve well-being. I just wanted to say that because I think it's important.
Yeah, and it's also not a straight line.
Oh gosh, no. I wish.
Can we talk a little bit more about, because the reason we do these things is that it is offering us something. And in the book, you actually detail some of the things that, and asking again this question, what is toxic productivity really offering me? And then we kind of get into these major subconscious motivators of toxic productivity. And if we can go through these, the first one is shaming yourself for not being good enough, smart enough, fast enough, or simply not enough. Your habits are an effort to make up for what you believe you lack. Yeah.
So that is like kind of like what you were talking about earlier, is I'm going to do this. Like in the example you were giving is like, I'm going to take care of my family. Right. And if I can do that, then I'm valued. I'm good enough. I'm a good enough father, mother, husband, brother, like whatever. Right. But there is no definition of what that enough is. So you keep doing it. You keep doing it, you keep doing it, but you're not actually stopping to give anything back to yourself. And a lot of times you're doing things that are very misaligned. They're value misaligned. You're doing them because somebody else thinks you should do them. And so when that balances off, you just have no idea what to do to make yourself feel good. And I want to say that when we think about what is toxic productivity offering us, right? At the core, it's offering us belonging and acceptance. That's what we're gunning for. That's what we're like racing towards, is if I do all these things, people will love me, I'll be valued, and I'll be accepted. To that, I say, how can we diversify where we get those feelings? So instead of being singularly focused on an outcome to make you feel that way, how can you diversify this? How can you engage in other things that might give you that return, but you were not considering before? I think a really good example for that for me in this last year, I call this year my year of hobbies, because I didn't really engage in any hobby-like activities that were not giving me like a valuable return, right?
Yeah.
And I would only watch serious movies and read serious books and listen to serious podcasts because I had to learn all the time. But this year, I just started doing things just for doing them. I wasn't even trying to be good at stuff. I took an improv class, zero experience, right? Did a whole show, like an improv show, zero experience. But it gave me the return, that feeling of community and acceptance and belonging, that I was like, wait, like, this actually feels really nice, even though I suck at it. So I think like that's the thing, is we can diversify where we get these needs met.
Yeah. But our blinders, right, from our emotional foundation, we tend to be like, it has to be this way. This is the way that I get this thing. Mm-hmm. When in reality, there are probably countless ways to get those inputs. So another one of these subconscious motivators that you talk about is being a perfectionist in how you meet others' expectations, or even your own expectations for yourself. Your habits are an effort to maintain a rigid ideal of what you, quote, should be.
Yes. Perfectionism is so glorified, right? People wear it like a badge of pride, but perfectionism is just a way to control things you can't control. It's an anxiety. I will be perfect, so I control how you view me. So I'm controlling your perception of me. I'm going to be perfect so I can control all the variables in my life. Mistakes are uncertain. I don't want to make those. I want to control it. So perfectionism is just an exercise of control. And it's extremely harmful because you cannot control this world. There will always be variables out of your control, right? And we can plan for and be prepared, but we can't aim for perfection. And there's 3 kinds of perfectionism, and they all kind of play their role in toxic productivity or just like unhealthy habits in general. One is the one you just kind of read over, which is I need to be perfect. The other, so that's internal, right? Self-directed. The other is you need to be perfect. So it's externally demanding, right? And the third is you need to see me as perfect. So your perception of me needs to be perfect. And it's a very confusing, convoluted place to be in. The only reason we glorify it is because it benefits the workplace, and it it benefits academia. It benefits the very, home domesticated life pattern that we have, especially in the heteronormative environment. Like perfectionism benefits people in that way. But it's actually not a helpful way of living. Yeah.
You don't say.
Yeah. I want people to lean into being a type B successful person. Like a type B person who is like, okay, things are out of control. I'll still figure it out somehow, instead of I need everything to be in control. And that's the only way I can figure it out. It's a very rigid mindset.
The third one of these subconscious motivators that you talk about is comparing yourself to others or to an idealized version of yourself. Mm-hmm. Talk about that one.
Gosh, comparison is a evolutionary mechanism, right? We evolved in these like communities. Human beings evolved in communities, right? And in order to be safe in these like far away, long ago communities, you had to be like the rest of the people. So you're constantly assessing and judging if you fall in line so that you don't stand out, right? So I'm talking about like hunter-gatherer societies. But the brain has evolved to take in information and automatically do comparisons. What's happened in the last 30 years is the data set has increased so much. Whereas before, I would only compare myself to the person in my neighborhood. Now I can compare myself to somebody in New Zealand, right?
Right.
At any time of the day or night. And so the community is the whole world. And because we're comparing predominantly on social media, we're also comparing to other people's chapter 5, right? While we are on chapter 1. Someone might look at your show and be like, I gotta be like him. But they have no idea all of the things you had to do, the years you spent building this to get here. They're only gonna compare to your now. And so what happens is 2 things happen when we compare. 1 is we feel bad about ourselves. 2 is we start inheriting other people's values. Now, I want to live your life because I'm comparing myself to you. And when I inherit your values and your goals, I lose my own. So I lose connection to myself. And that's where the disengagement happens. You're just doing things because other people are doing it. That's kind of what happened with me, right? Like I was just doing things that my family wanted me to do, that I assumed in my head is what a successful woman is in New York, what a therapist should be like, right? What does it mean to be young in New York? Like I had all of these things in my head. But I was not connected to my own values, what I actually enjoyed, where I wanted to spend my time. And so comparison is not only the thief of joy, like that's what people always say. I think it also starts making you hate your own life because nothing feels good enough. If I log in and every day I'm seeing somebody who looks a certain way and has a certain lifestyle, I'm just not going to be grateful about the stuff I have because I will only see deficits. And that can be a very sad place to be in.
Now, we know many of us today, thanks to you and kind of shining a light inward, that these might be causing some issues in our life, this toxic productivity. How do we address this? Like, what are some practical things we can do? Because I know that voice, and many of us know that voice of when we're not being productive, our mind is talking shit.
Yeah.
Like, you could be doing this, you should be doing that. How can we silence that inner critic a little bit?
Yeah. So there's a couple of ways, depending on where you're at. So if you are somebody who is not very emotionally connected, let's say you're at the beginning of your journey, right? And you don't have a lot of vocabulary, you can't really figure out how you feel. To those people, I say, get in your body. When your mind starts being very critical, you kind of lose touch with your body. But your body is reacting. You will physiologically feel the impact of those negative thoughts. So when you start feeling this chatter come through, see if you can engage in some body work. And that can look like anything. It can be a meditation. It can be like a body scan. It can be dance. It can be working out. It can be whatever it is, but just kind of get in your body. Feel connected to your body because that will help ground you. What happens is the inner critic gets going, you get super activated, stress hormones are all over the place. What do? You try to distract and you go into doing something. Yeah. What you want to do is just kind of relax your body, bring yourself down so that you can counter those thoughts. You won't be able to counter those thoughts if you're activated, right? So that's one thing I'd say. For people who are a little bit more emotionally attuned or have a practice of introspection, I would say the thing that I love doing is fact checking my thoughts. You know, kind of like putting on this like argumentative hat and asking my thoughts why. Why should I be doing something? Like, why can't I do this later? Why can't I just sit here right now? It is a little bit more combative, but that's the point. The point is to show your inner critic that you are unreasonable, that this is unrealistic. The world is not going to end if I just sit here and watch TV for one night. And that is probably my biggest struggle. is that chatter. So you have to have multiple ways to kind of get there, right? So body work, fact checking, like talking back to your thoughts is really helpful. Another thing you can do is something I like doing with clients is writing out your thoughts as they're coming. So like a stream of consciousness. Literally set a timer for 3 minutes, literally just write down every thought that's coming through. Then read it when the timer goes off and highlight all the mean words. And then you'll be surprised at how mean you are to yourself. And then ask yourself, like, would I literally ever say this to anybody else? Would I say this to a young child? Would I ever speak to a stranger like this? And you will be shocked at how much, like, just like how disparaging we can be to ourselves without even realizing it. It's just a norm, right? You're so lazy. You're so stupid. You're so silly. You're so disorganized. You're such a mess. We just say this stuff to ourselves all the time. And the final thing somebody can do is sometimes it's hard to counter the thoughts. Sometimes it's hard to turn down the volume. So what can you do? You can turn up the volume on the coach. So try to drown it out, right? Try to tap into a voice that is very validating, that is affirming, that is countering, but in a more gentle way. And that helps some people more than being combative. And I call that like your inner coach. And I think it's really nice to think about somebody from your past who you really cared about, who cared about you, and you can envision them, or like a made up future version of yourself who, you know, is very kind and incredible and all of that. So,
yeah, that's so powerful.
Yeah.
That is such a powerful example. This is one of our greatest capacities as humans, for us to visualize, for us to use our mind and find, like, again, somebody who's been a figure of love in your life to speak to you about these issues, or your future self, and just being able to say, you know, everything's going to be okay,
Yeah.
you know? And these are, again, thank you for inviting us to go inward, because we have these tools available all the time.
Yeah.
But usually, you know, our minds are scurrying off in all these different directions.
Mhm.
And so it's so powerful. And I think it's really about, and you have a chapter on this as well, for us today, if we're engaged in something like this and listening to a podcast to better ourselves, we do have privilege. And this is not just because it's different, it's better necessarily, because we have a generation previously that just like, you guys aren't working hard enough.
Yeah.
You're soft. We had bullets flying around and You know, I had to walk to school in, 7 feet of snow backwards,
with no shoes.
With no shoes,
Yeah.
right? And, and you think this is tough. And then, we have a generation now that has the ability to create success from their phone, right? There's so much more potential for creativity and for the ability, if we chose, to be introspective about our thoughts and what we really want. We live at a time of far more options, right? And we could argue that our previous generation made those options possible, right? And what I'm feeling encouraged to do is to blend the two together, because the previous generation, for many of us that have had parents or grandparents, experienced a dysfunction from that as well. And, that parent or grandparent not having an ability to be personable or to, express themselves in a healthful manner, or, to have a modicum of self-care and all these things. And maybe they, again, experienced some not so good things because of those things, right? And so we can learn from those and then take the best of today and imbue them together. And it's really about reimagining productivity. So why did you choose to have that to be a focus as well?
The reason I want to reimagine productivity is because productivity is essential to growth for societies, for people, for relationships. So I think it's very challenging to continue to stay productive in the way that we define it right now, because the current definitions of productivity don't actually include rest in it. Rest is something that is outside of productivity, right? Resting and joy is almost antithetical to productivity. So for me, though, you just can't be productive if you don't have joy. You can't be productive if you're not resting, right? So for me, I want to make sure that we don't rid ourselves of productivity, but I want to reimagine it, redefine it so that it's healthier and sustainable. And I think that's a really important conversation to have. And it's also very empowering. I feel like I was very disempowered at one point in my life because I felt like I was at the mercy of my tasks and my calendar and my obligations and my self-imposed expectations. Like I have read journals from my past where I journal a lot in the research for this book. And I've read some past journals and I'm like, damn, like I feel sad for that girl. Like my heart would break sometimes reading some of that stuff because I just didn't fully grasp how beautiful, dynamic, and complex life can be because I was so singularly focused on just one little box, one definition of it. So I think that's why I want to reimagine it, because I want people to experience the beauty and dynamic nature of life.
Yeah. And these insights and so much more is in Toxic Productivity. And as of this recording, it's available everywhere books are sold. So run out and grab your copy at your favorite bookstore, of course, online, your favorite online retailer. Is there anything else? Is there any specific place people can go to connect more with you, or a certain place you want people to pick up a copy of the book?
Yeah. So if you go on my website, israhnasir.com, there's a book page. The book page is going to have a lot of resources. So like a lot of downloadable stuff as like add-ons to the book. So definitely get that. And other than that, Instagram. I'm very active on Instagram. I'm still the person who responds to the DMs. So I do get a lot of people chatting with me there. And it really helps me understand where people are at, because I can see the themes of the questions people are asking and what their pain points are. And it helps me kind of like design my content to be more relevant. So I'm always happy to chat.
Hey, if you like this video, make sure to check out this video right here.
We wait for a moment in time. Something has to happen in order for us to be happy. And to me, happy isn't something that you go and find. Happy grows from you. Happy grows from a moment. Happiness is something that you seek to evoke and emanate and grow and experience and touch